Okay, I'm gonna try to remember as much as I can. Okay, I would say I probably had a half dozen experiences, out-of-body experiences that were very, very significant. Okay, very, very common in many of them. It's a very mental experience. It's happening on an extremely high intellectual level. It's beyond time, and it's almost like a think tank, like in some kind of a think tank. And I can remember learning that we're outside, that the fact that we're under time is clearly a sign that we're servants or subjects, and that we're slaves to time. Basically, we have to respond to time. I can always remember from my own self is bringing up the Virgin Mary as the Queen of the universe. And there were times, many times, in which, as I was being purified wherever I was, almost like a purgatorial experience, I remember coughing. Coughing was common in most of these experiences, and the coughing was coughing out darkness or sin or evil or something like that. That as I would progress through whatever kind of mental maze I was going through, I would always experience a coughing sensation. And I can also remember always having as my end goal Jesus and Mary, and really most specifically Mary as the answer, the Queen for the human race. Never without Jesus, of course. Jesus is God, okay? Now, Mary is not God, but always the common ground, the one who would bring all humans together is Mary. All religions, all, like the Virgin Mary, the mother of all. And these aren't like heavy theological experiences. These are more mystical, spiritual experiences. And I can remember very specifically one time where I would bring forth this notion, that Mary is the Queen of the universe, and there would always be like silence and like just waiting to see what would happen. And I can remember like one time bringing this forth and then like being dropped, actually 2 times dropped. So I don't know if I was levitating, but like just being literally dropped to a hard floor in which I got hurt or bruised or something like that. the one time in particular, I was saying, Mary, I completely surrender to you. And next thing you know, I'm just dropped on the ground, okay? I can remember one time getting hit by, like, I felt like a middle linebacker just running towards me, and I couldn't see anything but physically getting pushed and having to grab a railing to hold on. And I can remember having, strange as this sounds, my guitar. Like, I had to throw my guitar out the door because it had become whatever, possessed or whatever. Trust me, I don't just throw my guitar out any doors, okay? I can remember having to shoo these presences out of my house, okay, on a number of occasions. But it's the experiences. So basically, the best way I can describe it is that there are spiritual scientists who are carrying out what some people would call abductions, and people are being taken to these scientists, and maybe that's who I was preaching to, are these innocent, vulnerable human beings who are being manipulated and programmed and whatever by these beings. And then I'm in the same presence, and I'm bringing forth that Mary is the queen of the universe, and I'm getting slammed and beat up and kicked out and all kinds of stuff like that. So that's, pretty much, and I can remember having extensive periods of almost like running a mental marathon, where there was no end in sight, and it was truly purgatorial. And the coughing, there was always a coughing, a purifying coughing that was going on all the time. That was all the time. So it's very difficult to make complete sense of what's happening. The most recent time I got hit twice. First time I was just broadsided and then dropped, like after the experience was done. There was a time very specifically where I almost saw something enter my head or come out my head, one of the two. And this was right at the end of the experience where there was something going on. There was a time when I woke up and I found myself in a position of on my knees with my head back, my back fully extended, my feet under my rear end, and my head touching the ground behind me, and I couldn't move. I could move my arms, but I couldn't move my legs. It was like my legs were paralyzed, and it was getting cold and colder and colder, and I had no feeling in my legs, and I was stuck in a position with my back straight back and my head to the ground, and I couldn't get out of it. And I cried and screamed for help, and someone came and got me out of that position. Unbelievable. I don't know what would have happened if that person wasn't there, I'll be honest with you. There were times when I felt I was going to die, clearly. Number of times. I never panicked over the death. I was prepared to a certain extent for it. Clearly taken out of my body, clearly not thinking I was coming back. And at times, not necessarily feeling like I was in heaven, okay? And I never felt like I was in hell, ever. But this other place, and with no real control over, where the door was, or getting out or something like that. You know what I mean? I just became part of something that was like a continuing. It was a flowing. It was a mechanical process of thought that I just entered into. It was thinking on a much higher level than earthly, because you weren't consumed or concerned with earthly thinking. Everything was on a much higher level, clearly a much higher level of communication, of thinking, of experiencing consciousness. And at times it was exhilarating and fascinating and very superior, there's no question about it. But then whenever it came time for the check on me, it was always Jesus and Mary on my lips, and this was my input. And there was one time when I really felt that the message got through. And there were times when I can remember waiting for a response, to Jesus and Mary, waiting for a response. And I can remember where, in particular, this one situation where there were clearly thinking beings who were coming from a completely different place with really nothing in common, and we were trying to meet at the Blessed Mother. And I was always the one that was completely surrendered, I was always the one that was completely resolved to, in essence, defer my existence to her. Honestly, whatever, wherever, whoever, I was always resolved and thankful and grateful to have any place under her queenship that I was allowed to have. Never wanting more, or never manipulating or trying in any way, shape, or form to be deceptive or dishonest. In this world, I was always completely 100% honest and aware of my own shortcomings, and her, Mary's, presence, but not immediate presence, but the thought of her and bringing